Brian, Phantom of the Paradise was a movie I really enjoyed. Now, in the movies that you've done, that you've considered risky to you professionally, how does that one rate?
High. Very high. Because whenever you mix genres like that, you don't know whether it's a horror film, you don't know whether it's a musical, you don't know whether it's a comedy or a satire. The audience gets very confused, and unless you catch them at the right time in the right place, they don't get it, and they don't go. And then, of course, later everybody says, boy, what a wonderful movie. I wonder why nobody went to see it. You just really have to be at the right place at the right time.
If we go back to Carrie for a moment, that was your first big box office hit. Amy Irving, I spoke to her a couple of months ago, and she was saying what an impact that film had on her career. What was your first indication that you would become more in demand when that film came out?
Oh, I guess, let me see. I guess the fact that, studios started to take me seriously, and I started to get scripts submitted from major studios, as opposed to having to run around and find money to make independent features, which I had made quite a few of in the past.
Now, a film that received a lot of publicity a year and a half ago, Bonfire, the Vanities. Now, it's been a year and a half. What are your feelings about that whole experience now?
Well, basically, I think I made a terrible mistake in trying to, what I thought, broaden the base of the appeal of the movie by making the characters a little more likable, making it a little more comic, instead of making it a tougher and more darkly cynical movie. And I guess the lesson to be learned from that is respect the text and direct the text, and I didn't do that.
A movie of yours that was very thought-provoking, which I really enjoyed, was Casualties of War. When I saw that film, a lot of mixed reaction from people getting out. They didn't like the idea of American soldiers, or some American soldiers, being villains. Now, I wanted to know, how did that movie do in foreign markets? And when you made that film, was that a concern of yours that it would be a commercially viable film in the U.S.?
Not really. I mean, as a film I wanted to make for decades, and it's a very painful, agonizing story based on something that actually happened. And you just have to make movies like that when you have a chance to make them. It's a terrifying thing to live through and to experience in a movie theater. And I think the reasons that it was not successful is because it's painful to watch.
Yeah. Now, you've had a lot of films that have been great successes and others that haven't been as successful. Have you ever been surprised by the films that have done extremely well and the ones that weren't box office hits?
I'm always surprised. You never know what's going to happen, how people react to your movies, how successful they are, usually catches you by surprise. Sometimes you have some indicators that this seems like this is going to be a big success, or this seems like it's going to be a very difficult film that people aren't going to really get. But you're so close to the material that you're rationalizing the good or the bad news.
Now, with Carlito's Way, recreating the mid-1970s, how difficult was it for your people to track down all those disco clothes?
That wasn't so much of a problem. Of course, you have to get a lot of them because we have these big crowd scenes. But it was anytime you do a period picture, you've constantly got to change street signs and cars on the streets, and things that weren't sticking out of windows and buildings when you're on the streets that are now there. But I liked recreating the 70s because it sort of reminded me of Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah, speaking of that, the music now. Interesting soundtrack. Now, if a disco makes a comeback because of this movie, will you be proud or ashamed?
I will be proud because I thought disco was a lot of fun.
Now, working with Pacino this time as opposed to with Scarface, now what was the biggest difference you saw with him with this movie?
Well, Scarface, he plays like a cold-blooded killer who just gets worse and worse and worse. This character is a very compassionate character. It's more like Dog Day than anything I can think of, or Serpico, in which you feel his love for Penelope and his commitment to Sean. It's a very romantic gangster picture. It isn't, you know, cold and bloodless.
But Al Pacino, the actor, like how is he different doing this film?
He's more or less the same. Al is, you know, a relentless perfectionist. He lives and breathes the movie 24 hours a day. He's always trying to make it better. He constantly questions everything that he doesn't feel works exactly, and he constantly wants to try different material until he gets something that we all feel that works.
Now, with the climax in this movie, you know, in a train station, very dramatic, very gracefully done, I know people are going to compare it to The Untouchables, and I'm sure you're aware of that.
The comparisons I've read, they said it's better than The Untouchables. It's quite a compliment.
Now, did you have a little hesitancy about staging a sequence like that in a similar background?
Not really. You know, you find as a director that you're kind of attracted to similar locations. I've had a couple of sequences at train stations now, and I guess basically because they're the only really kind of big, open, classically architectural spaces that we have around. They're not these modern, you know, things with ceilings 6 feet high. They have these huge spaces. It looks like a big opera setting. Excuse me. Brian DePalma sneezes. So, you know, in Blowout I had one, in Untouchables I had one, and I just think it's because of the space.
And one last quick question. You know, Scarface got a lot of flack for the violence in that film. The violence in this film here seems to have more of a price to pay whenever someone fires a gun. What is your attitude about violence in movies, in your movies, changed over the year, or how has it changed?
I think it has very much to do with the material. I mean, Scarface was a cold-blooded killer. You know, that was the premise of the piece. And all he did was take more cocaine and get worse. I mean, it was like a Richard III rise and fall. He was evil at the beginning and evil at the end. This is more of a romantic gangster picture in which he's constantly throwing guns away and taking guns away from people. He doesn't want to have that in his life anymore. And anytime he picks up a gun, he's practically backed up against the wall with 3 guys firing at him.